Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Welcome to the Australia 2017 Formula One podcast. For those of you who have not yet seen the Australian Grand Prix, I warn all of you, there are tremendous spoilers ahead, and if you do not want to be spoiled, you're going to watch the race later on, please click away now. For those of you who are remaining with us, let's begin our story with qualifying. The qualifying session was cloudy with a few spots of rain. However, after a red flag brought out by Daniel Ricciardo unfortunately binning the Red Bull into the barriers at the end of Sector 3, that delay was enough for the sun to come back out and some quick lap times to be set. In pole position, we had Lewis Hamilton with his best lap time of 1:22.188. These lap times in 2017 are absolutely ridiculous. Hamilton over 2 seconds faster than Michael Schumacher's pole time for the 2004 race. So 2017 already some of the fastest Formula One cars that we have ever seen. Unbelievable performance level this year. In second place, on the front row, the first front row start for Ferrari in a very long time, Sebastian Vettel with a 1:22.456. So about 0.3 of a second, the gap there between Hamilton and Vettel on the front row. In third position, Valtteri Bottas in the second Mercedes, his lap time 1:22.481, so just a fraction slower than Vettel, and he headed up row 2. In fourth position, Kimi Räikkönen with a lap time of 1:23.033. Fourth for Max Verstappen in the second Red Bull, the sole remaining Red Bull after Ricciardo had his accident, 1:23.485. P6 for Romain Grosjean, the best qualifying effort to date for Haas with a 1:24.074. Great to see Haas making it through to Q3 in their second season, the first race in that second season. In P7, Felipe Massa, 1:24.443. The Formula One journeyman has certainly not lost any pace, even though he, technically speaking, hanged up his helmet at the end of 2016. P8 for Carlos Sainz, 1:24.487. P9, his teammate Daniel Kvyat, 1:24.512. And poor old Daniel Ricciardo qualified P10 after not being able to set a lap time in Q3. However, he was later relegated to P15 due to a gearbox change. And there's another half to that story that we will get to in a moment. P11 for Sergio Perez in the Force India, the first of the Q2 eliminated, 1:25.081. P12 Hulkenberg, 1:25.091. So Renault and Force India are really knocking on each other's back doors there. P13, a remarkable qualifying effort for Fernando Alonso in that recalcitrant McLaren with a 1:25.425. P14 for Esteban Ocon in the second Force India, 1:25.568. And rounding out the Q2 finishers, Marcus Ericsson in the first of the Saubers, 1:26.465, almost a full second behind the Force India of Esteban Ocon. Eliminated in Q1, P16, Antonio Giovinazzi, the surprise debutant driver for Sauber. He was called up on Saturday morning after Pascal Wehrlein took himself out of the weekend because he was concerned about his fitness levels. Wehrlein, of course, was injured at the end of last year in the Race of Champions. He had a back injury and he missed out on a lot of testing and training, so therefore he did not feel that he was fit enough to make the entire Grand Prix distance, and quite wisely and certainly a great example of sportsmanship and looking after the team, he said, "I'm not fit to race, let Giovinazzi do the job," and he certainly did do the job with P16. P17 for Kevin Magnussen in the second Haas, 1:26.847. P18 for Stoffel Van Dorn, 1:26.858. In 19, Lance Stroll, the Canadian debutant for the second Williams car, 1:27.143, and bringing up the rear in qualifying at least was Julian Palmer in the second Renault with a 1:28.244. Palmer certainly did not have a very good weekend. He just has not had the pace. He's been criticizing the car heavily, which quite honestly is not a very smart decision, especially when Alain Prost is involved in your team. Prost, of course, being sacked at one time long ago by Ferrari for doing just that, criticizing the car. Regardless, Palmer at the back of the grid. Race day, however, dawned bright, shining and clear, and those wonderfully fair weather conditions remained for the duration of the Australian Grand Prix. The first race of the season, I just have to say that I personally enjoyed it quite a lot. Not only because it is the first race of the season and it's our first chance to get our dose of Formula One after the interminable off-season. However, I honestly do think that it was a very interesting race, particularly from a strategic standpoint, as we will get into. However, after 57 laps, we'll get into why there was a 1-lap deduction in a moment. In first place with a time of 1 hour, 24 minutes, 11 seconds, we have Sebastian Vettel of Scuderia Ferrari in first position. This was definitely the result that Ferrari and all of Italy set as an imperative. Probably sometime in 2015, Ferrari must return to the front of the field, and Sebastian Vettel has delivered on that imperative. Ferrari's first victory since Singapore 2015. They endured 2016 winless. Absolutely dreadful record for Ferrari of late. However, they have begun finally to set that right straight out of the gate in 2017. Victory to Ferrari in Melbourne. In second place, 10 seconds behind the road, scoring 18 points, is number 44, Lewis Hamilton of Mercedes-AMG. Hamilton was sounding very harried over the radio for most of the race. He complained that the tires were not working particularly well on his Mercedes. The problems behind those tires, not entirely sure what they were. Did they get unlucky with the tire sets, or does that W08 chassis just have a little bit of a problem working with its tires? That's all remaining to be seen. However, Hamilton finishing second behind Sebastian Vettel. Rounding out the podium in third place is Valtteri Bottas in the second Mercedes, 11.3 seconds down the road from Vettel, and a cool 15 points to the Finn on his Mercedes debut. Bottas, I have to laud his driving. He did absolutely everything letter perfect during this race. There was a chance there in the middle where perhaps he could have caught up and overtaken Lewis Hamilton. However, he held station. I don't know if that was team orders necessarily. However, Bottas taking the Mercedes to the final step of the podium in his first race for the team. Absolutely wonderful, and a double podium finish for Mercedes, already looking good and consistent for their Constructors' Championship hopes. In fourth position, the second Ferrari of Kimi Räikkönen, a full 22.4 seconds down the road from the race winner, scoring 12 points. In fifth, we have Max Verstappen in the only Red Bull to finish the race, 28.8 seconds down the road, 10 points to the Dutchman. In P6, Felipe Massa on return from his very brief and zero-race retirement stint, 8 points for the Williams FW40. Great result from the very experienced Brazilian. In P7, Sergio Perez, first car to be classified at least one lap down, 6 points to Force India there. And in 8th and 9th, we have the two Toro Rossos, Carlos Sainz and Daniel Kvyat, respectively, scoring a cool 6 points for Toro Rosso. In 10th and rounding out our points, Esteban Ocon, his first points finish in Formula One, a double points finish for Force India, also looking very, very strong to head up the midfield, perhaps fighting out with Toro Rosso there. The first of our non-point scorers, we have Nico Hülkenberg in P11, one lap down for Renault, and in 12th, the first car 2 laps down, we have Antonio Giovinazzi, a very nice debut drive for the young Italian, deputizing for Pascal Wehrlein, who took himself out of the race, as I mentioned before, due to lingering issues from his injury sustained in the Race of Champions. The final car classified 2 laps down, P13, Stoffel van Dorn for McLaren Honda. Not classified are Fernando Alonso, Kevin Magnussen, Lance Stroll, Daniel Ricciardo, Marcus Ericsson, Jolyon Palmer, and Romain Grosjean. First and foremost, Vettel's victory was famously well received both by the fans who stormed the racetrack during the cooldown lap. No doubt there are going to be some investigations and some possible fines levied against the race organizers for allowing that situation to occur when it did. But so many Ferrari flags, fans wearing Ferrari gear, it was absolutely crazy. It was very reminiscent of the scenes that we usually see at Monza, particularly after a Ferrari victory. So an absolutely popular win for Vettel and Ferrari. On the cooldown lap, Sebastian Vettel very complimentary of the team, as you may expect. The team radio, "Questa vittoria è per noi. Grazie a tutti, un grande lavoro." Roughly translated, this victory is for us. Thank you, everybody. Great work. So, of course, that victory much awaited for Sebastian Vettel and for Ferrari and for Formula One. For the first time in 4 years, we now have somebody other than a Mercedes driver leading the Drivers' Championship. This is something that we have needed for a long time, and it does make me say, at risk of imposing the commentator's curse, if you will, that we could well be in for a classic season, because Mercedes are absolutely right there, and Ferrari have well and truly returned to the sharp end of the field. We now have a team-to-team fight for the Constructors' Championship, and who knows, I will say probably for the Drivers' Championship as well. It does well and truly appear to be on between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton. The two greatest drivers of our generation now, finally, in 2017, appear to have the opportunity to go head-to-head for the World Championship. This already, even though the season is one race old, has the potential to be an absolute classic. Now to get into some of the nitty-gritty storylines of the race, we have to go back to qualifying for the first one. Daniel Ricciardo in Q3, the opening minutes thereof, he managed to stuff his RB13 into the barriers in the end of Sector 3. It's a very interesting, somewhat odd place to go off in a Formula 1 car. However, with the increased downforce and the increased mechanical grip this year, it appears that when these cars overstep that slip angle on the tires, particularly those very wide rear tires, it appears that the grip just goes away instantaneously, and try as he might, a driver has absolutely no chance of recovering from that spin. It wasn't quite a full spin from Ricciardo. He kind of turned around through 270 degrees, and then the car just went backwards into the barrier. Seemed like a rather gentle impact at first glance, but it was enough to rip the rear end completely off of the RB13, and it necessitated a gearbox change, which relegated Ricciardo, who would have started 10th otherwise, to 15th on the grid due to the 5 grid place penalty that an unscheduled gearbox change imposes. To make matters worse, however, when Ricciardo left the pits on race day on his reconnaissance laps to the grid, the car became stuck in 6th gear, and Ricciardo once again was left stranded in Sector 3 while he frantically radioed to the pits as to what he should do to try to fix the problem. Initially, it appeared that Red Bull might be able to field him a solution, looking at the telemetry and then walking him through some sort of reset procedure through the steering wheel. However, that proved fruitless, and Ricciardo had to get out of the car, and then it was towed back to the pits, where Red Bull worked ferociously trying to get it out on the grid for the start. The start, however, was aborted, and there was no clear reason as to why it was aborted. Initially, Hülkenberg and Perez gridded up in the wrong positions. However, because they were a little bit arrears of where they should have been, they were able to creep forward into their appropriate grid slots. However, by this time, apparently a marshal triggered some sort of warning signal to Charlie Whiting up there in the starter's booth, and Charlie, very wisely I must say, decided to abort the start, therefore reducing the race distance by 1 lap to 57 laps, just so that people don't run out of fuel in the last couple of laps, because they didn't calculate for that. This gave Red Bull a little bit more time to get Ricciardo ready for the race, and he was able to join the race, albeit on lap 2 starting from the pit lane. So Ricciardo did join the 2017 Australian Grand Prix, albeit 2 laps down. The second grid and the second start, however, worked without a hitch, and all cars got away from the line when the 5 lights went out. Good starts from Hamilton and Bottas, as well as from the 2 Ferraris, who quite interestingly appeared to have absolutely identical getaways off the grid. Whatever clutch map Ferrari are using, and whatever clutch release technique Ferrari have instituted among their drivers, it works absolutely flawlessly on both sides of the garage. So Vettel and Raikkonen getting away well, as did Hamilton and Bottas. The first corner was actually pretty clean. All the cars made it through the first corner, albeit with throwing up a little bit of dirt from the outside. However, turn 3 was a slightly different story, with Ericsson and Magnussen getting together on the exit of turn 3. That put both cars out into the grass. However, they were both able to pull themselves out of that situation and later resume the race. In the first couple of laps, Hamilton led Vettel. However, quite interestingly and quite tellingly, Vettel was able to keep in touch with Hamilton. For the first couple of laps, he remained in DRS range. However, that Ferrari power unit apparently didn't have quite enough grunt to be able to get close enough to Hamilton for Vettel to try and overtake, so he decided to hold station and look after his tires a little bit, which was an absolutely wonderful bit of strategy. Hamilton was able to lead the first stint. However, when he made his first pit stop on lap 17, it was markedly earlier than any other of the front runners. Hamilton pits on lap 17 and Vettel was able to stay out until lap 23. This would later prove to be an absolutely brilliant strategy call by Ferrari. When Hamilton pitted, there was a radio transmission from Ferrari to Vettel saying, "Keep going, the tires look fine," and apparently Vettel agreed with that assessment and he was able to keep going because the tires were in fact fine. Playing the spoiler role in that first pit stop rotation, however, was Max Verstappen. He was running very consistently, running pretty quickly, again on his own strategy there, but what Verstappen was able to do was basically to play the rear gunner inadvertently for Sebastian Vettel, so that when Vettel made his pit stop, Hamilton resumed in P2 behind Verstappen and Vettel. Effectively P2, Bottas had still inherited the race lead by that point. However, the race for the win was essentially decided by Max Verstappen being able to slot himself between the Ferrari and the Mercedes after the pit stops. So that absolutely ruined Lewis Hamilton's day, and I'm not sure if Ferrari were accounting for that, Verstappen being able to be a de facto rear gunner for Vettel, but it absolutely worked a treat, and after the pit stops, Vettel was slowly but surely able to pull away from Lewis Hamilton. The Englishman, however, understandably discontented with the situation he saw unfolding before his eyes, he also sounded very harried on the radio for almost the entire race. Even during the first stint in which he was leading, he was saying that the tires were not working well for him, that they had run out of grip very early on, and that could be one of the reasons why he made that early pit stop on lap 17 versus Vettel being able to stay out until lap 23. Both cars started on the Ultrasofts, Vettel and Hamilton. However, Hamilton was not able to make those tires last for nearly as long as Vettel was able to do. So it raises a couple of interesting questions that perhaps we don't have answers for yet. Clearly, the tires are not working as well for Hamilton as they are for Vettel. But is this a tire issue? Did Mercedes somehow get a crappy set of tires? It's somewhat possible, but I seriously doubt it, simply because Pirelli have very good quality controls. What I think really is happening is we have an indication of maybe a little bit of a chassis deficit on that Mercedes, because Hamilton, try as he might, and certainly he knows what he is doing, he is in his 10th year in Formula 1, and he is a 3-time world champion. However, Hamilton just could not get those tires to work. So is that a chassis deficit on Mercedes, or is that some sort of a driving style attribute of Hamilton's that he's going to have to work with to get these tires to perform a little bit better? Because clearly Sebastian Vettel was able to be more gentle with his tires, and that translated into him being able to stay out for a little bit longer before his first and only pit stop, and therefore that was the difference between Vettel or Hamilton winning this Grand Prix. In the backfield, we had some dramas, namely the retirements, the first of which was car number 8, the Haas of Romain Grosjean, on lap 13. Without any warning whatsoever, the Frenchman reported he had a complete loss of engine power, followed immediately by a whole spray of smoke and sparks out the back of the VF17. He was able to recover the car to the pit lane, where he promptly retired. Unknown at this point what exactly happened to that Ferrari engine, but to me it looked like it could be some sort of a turbo-related issue, simply because when a turbocharged engine is spewing that much smoke, it's usually indicative of some sort of oil leak in the turbocharger, and it just shoots it out the back, and it's all very dramatic with a lot of smoke and sparks. But for whatever reason, Grosjean out of the Australian Grand Prix, following on the best qualifying effort to date for Haas, P6. I have no doubt, however, that the American outfit will be back fighting strong in China, hoping to score their first points of the year. Our second retirement on lap 15, Julian Palmer in the second Renault. Palmer had an absolutely diabolical weekend. He just absolutely has no pace whatsoever, and he doesn't own up for it either. Palmer is very quickly becoming my driver to rag on, I have to say. He hasn't done anything of note yet in Formula 1, and yes, I understand it's his second season, but he criticizes the car at every possible opportunity, and he doesn't seem to be able to say, I made a mistake. He hit the wall in the practice session, and some sort of failure caused his retirement on lap 15 of the Australian Grand Prix. Marcus Ericsson, our third retirement on lap 21. I suspect it was crash damage from that lap 1 tangle with Marcus Ericsson. Daniel Ricciardo, lap 25, he retired. He did manage, as I mentioned before, to start the race, obviously. However, another gearbox problem caught him out at the end of the first sector. The onboard video footage was very telling. The car sounded normal, and then instantaneously, through the downshifts coming into turn 3, the gearbox ate itself alive, and Ricciardo was left stranded at the marshal post there. On lap 40, Lance Stroll very unceremoniously pulled into the pits to call it quits on his debut race. Suspension problems on that Williams. Lap 46, Kevin Magnussen, the second Haas, also retiring, a double DNF for Haas in their first race of the year. I also suspect crash damage playing some sort of part in Magnussen's retirement. He was the second car involved in that scuffle with Marcus Ericsson on lap 1. On lap 50, our final DNF, Fernando Alonso. He was only 7 laps from the end, and he was running in 10th. He could have scored points. Unbelievable drive for Alonso to be able to score points in that McLaren. However, it was not to be. Suspension problems on that MCL 32. On the lap before he retired, Alonso was very dramatically overtaken on the start-finish straight by Nico Hülkenberg and Esteban Ocon, in which he lost that 10th place. However, it didn't matter. Alonso radioing saying that there was some sort of suspension problem with the McLaren. He said the car was pulling off to the left. Not entirely sure what that issue actually was, however. In the end, that meant that only one McLaren saw the checkered flag, Stoffel van Dorn in P13, classified 2 laps down. In terms of an overall race recap, however, as I said before, I greatly enjoyed this race. Yes, it's the first race of the season, but I liked that strategic battle between Ferrari and Mercedes. Ferrari able to use their tires a little bit more effectively than the Mercedes, it would appear. Therefore, that netted them those extra laps, which were all the difference in Sebastian Vettel getting that race victory. Max Verstappen certainly had something to do with that, however, seeing as he was able to play that rear gunner role for Sebastian Vettel. However, had Ferrari not been able to stay out for longer, that would not have happened, and Hamilton most likely would have comfortably resumed the lead. Would Vettel have been able to catch Hamilton, however? Who knows? I think there is a possibility, considering that Hamilton finished 10 seconds down the road from Vettel by the end of the Grand Prix. However, that strategic fight was the highlight of this race for me from a technical standpoint, and I definitely enjoyed seeing that. In terms of the on-track action, we can say that perhaps there wasn't as much overtaking as maybe we've become accustomed to seeing. However, just to see these cars operating on that Albert Park circuit, which is famous for being very fast and very flowing, was something else. Turns 9 and 10, that fast chicane in the back straight area of the circuit, those cars are taking that at 250 kilometers an hour plus. That is absolutely crazy speed. The fastest that we have ever seen cars going around this track. Speaking of the fastest lap of the race, that goes to Kimi Räikkönen, who did it on lap 56 with a time of a 1:26.538 and an average speed of 220.605 kilometers per hour. That's not as fast as the fastest race lap from 2004. However, it is mighty close, and these cars, at least on some tracks, are going to be the fastest we have ever seen. I have absolutely no doubt about that. Pretty consistent race pace throughout most of the field, I must say. The fastest laps per driver are in the 1:26s all the way down to Max Verstappen in P5. Lewis Hamilton, His fastest lap was a 1:27.033, an average speed of 219.351 kilometers per hour, and that is only marginally faster than Kevin Magnussen, immediately behind him in the fastest lap classification in P7 with a 1:27.569, half a second between Hamilton and Magnussen. So interesting to see that Kimi Räikkönen, although he was not in contention to win the race, setting the fastest lap in true form to his 2008 escapades, coming alive in the middle of the Grand Prix. Kimi Räikkönen a full second quicker than Kevin Magnussen, and Lewis Hamilton only a half a second quicker than Kevin Magnussen in the Haas, which is a very different car operated by a very different team. So it's just interesting to see the distribution of speeds up and down the grid, and certainly these cars are very, very fast, and more importantly, they seem to be very, very consistent over the course of a run. Most of the field only making one pit stop. The only drivers to make 2 pit stops, Lance Stroll, Nico Hülkenberg, Kevin Magnussen, and Daniel Kvyat. Magnussen, of course, having to make those 2 pit stops due to crash damage after lap 1. However, very cool to see that not only the cars but the tires are very consistent so far this year, and it seems that a one-stop strategy, even when the Ultrasoft is in play, is a completely viable option for race strategy. In terms of what we can expect in 2 weeks' time from Shanghai, at this point it's a little bit of an unknown still, simply because Albert Park is a temporary street circuit and Shanghai is going to be the first race of the year that is held on a permanent racing facility. So perhaps we'll see a slightly different dynamic in terms of how the tires work there versus at Albert Park. Obviously Shanghai, it is a dedicated racetrack with tarmac that is built specifically for racing, so we'll see what the dynamic is like on that circuit versus Albert Park. However, in terms of the outright pace, I have to believe that this championship is going to be Ferrari and Mercedes fighting it out race by race. It's still not entirely clear who exactly has the better car. Ferrari were the winners on the day in Australia. However, does that translate into race by race performance over the course of the 19 races that remain for us in 2017? I'm certainly looking forward to finding that out alongside all of you, and that begins in 2 weeks from Shanghai. Until next time, however, thank you all very, very much for watching, and I definitely appreciate your likes, your comments, and all of your support. Do let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and perhaps what you would like to see in future Race Recap podcasts. Until next time, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very, very much, and we will see you soon.